Let's understand hot local winds in the simplest way. What are hot local winds? Winds are air that moves from one place to another. Local means it happens in a small or specific area, not everywhere. Hot means these winds feel warm or even very hot. How do they form? One, from warm places. Imagine there is a place that is very hot, like a desert. The wind that blows from that hot place will also be hot. It carries the heat with it. Two, from high places. Sometimes when wind comes down from a high mountain to a lower area, the air gets warmer as it moves down. This happens because of something called dynamic heating. It's like when you rub your hands together, they get warm. The air gets warmer as it moves down. Examples of hot local winds. 1. Lu. In India during the summer, a wind called Lu blows. It's very hot and dry, coming from the desert areas. 2. Chinook. In North America, there's a wind called Chinook. It comes from the Rocky Mountains. As the wind comes down the mountain, it becomes warm. People living near the mountains feel the warm air. Why are these winds important? Hot local winds can make the temperature in a place rise quickly. Sometimes they can dry out the land, which is why farmers may not like them. They can hurt crops. Key points. Hot winds come from warm places or high mountains. They make the air around them warmer. They are local, meaning they don't affect the whole world, just certain places. I hope this makes sense. Let's go step by step to explain foehn winds in even more detail, but still in the simplest way possible. What is a foehn wind? A foehn wind is a type of wind that is warm and dry. It happens when wind comes down the side of a mountain. This wind is special because it gets hotter as it moves down. Why does the wind get hotter? As the wind goes down the mountain, it gets squeezed by the air pressure around it. This squeezing makes the air warmer. Think of it like a bicycle pump. When you pump air into the tire, the air inside gets hot because it's being squeezed. This process of the air warming up as it goes down is called adiabatic heating. How do foehn winds form? 1. Wind comes from another place. Imagine wind is coming from a warm ocean or another place. It blows toward a mountain. 2. Wind goes up the mountain. When the wind hits the mountain, it rises to go over it. As the wind goes up, it gets cooler. Cooler air holds less water, so the water in the air turns into rain or snow. This rain or snow falls on the side of the mountain where the wind is blowing. This side is called the windward side. 3. Wind loses moisture. When it rains or snows, the wind becomes drier because it loses all the moisture water as precipitation. 4. Wind goes down the other side. The wind has crossed the mountain and starts moving down the other side, called the lee side. As it moves down, it warms up because the air is being compressed, squeezed by the higher air pressure near the ground. 5. Wind becomes hot and dry. As the wind continues going down the mountain, it keeps getting hotter and drier. This is because of the adiabatic heating, the warming caused by compression. By the time the wind reaches the ground, it feels like a hot, dry wind. This is the foehn wind. An example of foehn winds. In Switzerland, people often feel foehn winds on the northern side of the Alps. When the wind arrives, there's a big, fast rise in temperature. It can suddenly become much warmer within hours. Sometimes the temperature can go up by several degrees in just a short time. Why does the wind warm up faster on the lee side? When air goes up the mountain, it cools down because of the moist adiabatic rate. This means it cools by 6 degrees Celsius per kilometre as it rises. But when the air goes down the other side, it warms up faster at the dry adiabatic rate, which is 10 decels per kilometre. That's why the air feels so much warmer on the lee side. Effects of foehn winds. 1. Melting snow. In the winter and spring, these hot winds can make snow melt quickly. This is helpful for farming because it clears the land of snow. 2. Weather changes. When the foehn wind blows, it causes a rapid change in the local weather. The temperature rises quickly and the air becomes very dry. 3. Harm to crops. Sometimes the sudden rise in temperature can harm crops that are growing, especially if they are not ready for the heat. 4. Health effects. Some people feel a bit unwell when these winds blow. It can cause headaches or make people feel tired. Example of how the phone works. Imagine you're standing on a cold, snowy day in Switzerland. Suddenly, a phone wind starts blowing. In just a few hours, the snow melts and it feels much warmer. You might have been wearing a heavy jacket, but now you feel like taking it off because of how warm the wind has made it. Summary of phone winds. Phone winds are warm and dry winds that blow down the lee side of mountains. The wind becomes warm due to adiabatic heating as it gets squeezed while moving downhill. These winds can bring quick weather changes, melt snow, and sometimes harm crops. Now you should have a clear picture of what phone winds are and how they work. Let's break down Chinook winds in even more detail, making everything super easy to understand step by step. What are Chinook winds? Chinook winds are warm, dry winds that happen on the eastern side of the Rocky Mountains, mainly in places like Wyoming and Montana in the United States. They are called snow eaters because they melt snow very quickly. How do Chinook winds form? 1. Air comes from the other side of the mountain. Air or wind usually comes from the west side of the Rocky Mountains. The wind is cool and has moisture, water, when it starts its journey. 2. Wind goes up the mountain. The wind moves up the mountain slope. As the wind rises, the air cools down and loses moisture, meaning it rains also on the west side of the mountain. 3. Wind goes down the other side. After crossing the mountain, the air descends, goes down on the eastern side of the mountain. As the air goes down, it warms up because of compression. Compression means the air gets squeezed as it moves downward, making it hotter. 4. Wind becomes warm and dry. As the wind descends, it becomes warmer and drier. By the time it reaches the bottom of the mountain, it feels like a warm and dry wind. This is the Chinook wind. How much warmer do Chinook winds make the area? Chinook winds can make a huge difference in temperature, even in very cold weather. For example, if the temperature is -10 degrees Celsius, very cold, and a Chinook wind blows in, it can raise the temperature by 22 degrees Celsius in one day. So instead of freezing, it could feel like 12 degrees Celsius, which is much warmer. Some examples. In Montana, the temperature at a place called Kip increased by 19 degrees Celsius in just 7 minutes when a Chinook wind started. In Denver, Colorado, the temperature rose by 14 degrees Celsius in just 2 hours on January 27, 1940. Why do Chinook winds melt snow so quickly? Chinook winds are warm and dry, which makes them perfect for melting snow. When these winds blow over areas covered with snow, the snow melts very fast. Sometimes, instead of melting into water, the snow evaporates directly into the air because the winds are so dry. This process is called sublimation, when solid snow turns into gas without becoming liquid water. What effects do Chinook winds have? 1. Rapid snow melting. When a Chinook wind blows over snow-covered ground, the snow melts or evaporates very quickly. This is why Chinook winds are called snow eaters. Then number 2, big temperature changes. Chinook winds can cause a big and sudden change in temperature. For example, in a cold area, the temperature can go from very cold to much warmer in just a few hours. 3, helpful for ranchers. In places like the Great Plains, a flat area in North America, Chinook winds help ranchers, people who raise animals like cows and sheep. The winds melt the snow, which keeps the grasslands clear so the animals can eat the grass. 4, makes winter less harsh. The Chinook winds make the winters in the western Great Plains less harsh because they melt snow and bring warmer weather. Are there any downsides to Chinook winds? Yes, there are a few negative effects. 1, loss of soil moisture. Normally, when snow melts slowly, it gives water to the soil, which is good for plants. But when Chinook winds cause the snow to evaporate too quickly, the soil doesn't get enough water. This can make the ground dry. 2, can damage crops. Sometimes, if Chinook wing winds blow in too suddenly, the warm temperature can damage that are used to cold weather. How far do Chinook winds travel? Chinook winds don't just stay close to the Rocky Mountains. They can travel far, hundreds of kilometers, into flat areas like the Great Plains. So even places far from the mountains can feel the warm and dry Chinook winds. Summary. Chinook winds are warm, dry winds that form on the eastern side of the Rocky Mountains. They are called snow eaters because they make snow melt or disappear quickly. These winds can cause a big rise in temperature in just a few hours, even in the middle of winter. While Chinook winds are helpful for melting snow and making winters less cold, they can also dry out the soil and sometimes damage crops. Now, you should have a clear and simple understanding of how Chinook winds work, what they do, and their effects. Let's break down Santa Ana winds step by step in even more detail in the simplest way possible. What are Santa Ana winds? Santa Ana winds are warm, dry, and fast-moving winds. They blow across Southern California, especially near Los Angeles and the coast. These winds usually come during fall and winter. How do Santa Ana winds form? Step by step. 1. Cold air builds up in a high area. Far away from the coast, there is a high flat area of land called the Great Basin. In this area, cold air starts to build up, accumulate over time. 2. The cold air wants to move. The cold air in the Great Basin can't stay still forever. It wants to move out and go somewhere else. The easiest path is through the mountain valleys. 3. Air flows down the mountains. The cold air starts to move down through the valleys in the mountains like it's flowing down a slide. As the air moves down, it gets squeezed, compressed, which makes the air heat up. 4. The wind becomes warm and dry. As the air comes down the mountain, it turns from cold to warm because of the squeezing effect. This is called compression. The air also becomes very dry because it loses its moisture as it moves down. 5. The warm air reaches coastal lowlands. The wind keeps blowing until it reaches the coastal lowlands, flat areas near the coast. When it reaches places like Los Angeles or San Diego, it is now a warm and dry wind. Why are Santa Ana winds dangerous? 1. They dry up trees and plants. Santa Ana winds are so dry that they suck all the moisture, water out of the trees, grass and plants. This can cause trees and plants to wilt or dry up, which can be bad for farmers and gardeners. 2. They cause forest fires. The hot, dry air can make it easier for fires to start in forests or on dry grass. Once a fire starts, the fast-moving winds can spread the fire quickly, making it very dangerous for people and homes. 3. They carry a lot of dust. Sometimes Santa Ana winds pick up dust and sand as they blow. This can make the air hard to breathe, especially for people who have asthma or allergies. How do Santa Ana winds affect people and nature? 1. Impact on trees and farms. Farmers worry about their crops because Santa Ana winds can dry up plants and make them lose water. Orchards, places where fruit trees grow, can be hurt because the trees might dry out and stop producing fruit. 2. Impact on forest fires. Firefighters are on high alert when Santa Ana winds blow because any small fire can become a big fire very fast. In places where it's already very dry, like Southern California, Santa Ana winds can make things even more dangerous. 3. Impact on health. When Santa Ana winds pick up dust and blow it around, it can make it hard for people to breathe. People with allergies or breathing problems like asthma may find it especially difficult to go outside when these winds are blowing. Why do the Santa Ana winds get so hot? 1. Compression heating. As the cold air comes down from the mountains, it gets squeezed as it moves through the valleys. This squeezing effect is called compression, and it makes the air heat up as it gets closer to the ground. 2. Air loses moisture. When the air moves down the mountain, it becomes drier because it loses any moisture, water it was carrying. By the time it reaches the coastal areas, it is warm and very dry. Similar winds in other places. Santa Ana winds are not the only warm and dry winds. There are similar winds in different parts of the world. 1. Yamo winds in Japan. In Japan, a warm, dry wind similar to Santa Ana is called Yamo. It blows down from the mountains in the same way and makes the air warm and dry. 2. Zonda winds in Argentina. In Argentina, these winds are called Zonda. They blow down from the Andes Mountains and heat up as they come down. 3. Tramontane winds in Europe. In Central Europe, the wind is called Tramontane. It also blows down from mountains and becomes warm and dry by the time it reaches lower areas. Example of Santa Ana winds in real life. Imagine you're in Los Angeles. It's a normal fall day, but suddenly you feel a hot wind blowing from the mountains. The air feels dry and there's a lot of dust blowing around. You notice that the trees and grass are drying up and people start worrying about fires. This is what happens when Santa Ana winds start blowing. Extra detail. How fast do Santa Ana winds blow? Santa Ana winds can blow very fast. Sometimes they can reach speeds of 40 miles per hour or more, which is almost as fast as a car on a highway. This fast wind makes the fire danger even worse because it can spread the flames quickly. Summary. Santa Ana winds are warm, dry, and fast-moving winds that blow across Southern California. They form when cold air from the Great Basin flows through mountain valleys, gets heated, and becomes very dry. These winds can cause forest fires, dry up plants, and carry dust that makes breathing hard. Similar winds in other parts of the world include Zonda, Argentina, and Tramontane, Europe. This explains the Santa Ana winds in the simplest, most detailed way.
Again, winds definitely impact Southern California. You saw the results of that over this past weekend as those winds were so strong and dried things out. But let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about these winds and what causes these winds. Well, the destruction here, again, you can see the fires. This is a neat graphic. We see from a satellite shot here, you can see where the fires are near Los Angeles, and you can just see the flow. This is the Santa Ana wind blowing it out past the Channel Islands and out into the Pacific Ocean. So you can just see the strength of these winds and how far that the smoke can be carried because of the winds. The general weather pattern that we need to have for a situation like this is an area of high pressure. Not only do you have to have the high pressure, though, but you have to have the low. The combination of these two is going to create the pressure gradient that you need. Again, around high pressure, you have that moving around in a clockwise manner, and you can see the flow coming through across Nevada, over the southern deserts of California, from the high desert there, and then dropping in on the LA basin. And so it's the direction, of course, that is key and critical in the development of Santa Ana winds. But why are they so warm and why can they be so strong? Well, let's take a look at this next graphic here, and you can see what's called the adiabatic process. This is a process where you have pressure that controls the heat or the temperature of an air parcel. So let's move our air parcel along. Here you can see we have a little green bubble of air, and this is over the high desert, temperature of about 75 degrees. This is the actual scenario of what happened last weekend. I looked at the numbers, the surface temperatures over the high desert, about 75 degrees. You can see that there's this column of air. This is kind of an indicator of the column of air giving the pressure to this bubble of air. Now let's take this bubble of air and bring it up over the San Gabriel Mountains, and you can see that it's higher in elevation, so there's actually less pressure on it. You can see there's less of a column of air over top this bubble of air, and what happens is when you get less pressure, the air temperature is going to decrease as the air expands. So it's expansional cooling that's taking place after that air goes over top of the San Gabriel Mountains. Now, what's going to happen is that air is being driven again by that flow coming off of the high deserts over the mountains and into the LA basin. That bubble of air, as it sinks and descends quickly down the mountains, it compresses. And so what happens is you have compressional warming. So you get that air has a big column of air over top of it, our little bubble here, and so the temperature actually warms up to about 92 degrees. So we went from 75 degrees over the desert to 92 degrees in the LA basin, and those are the exact temperatures that we saw over this past.
Let's explain Sirocco in more detail in the simplest way possible. What is a Sirocco wind? Sirocco is a hot, dry, and sometimes dusty wind. It comes from the Sahara Desert, the big desert in North Africa, and blows toward countries near the Mediterranean Sea, like Italy and Spain. These winds usually happen when a storm or depression, bad weather with rain and clouds, is moving toward this area. How does a Sirocco wind form? 1. A storm forms over the Mediterranean Sea. A storm, which is also called a depression, forms over the Mediterranean Sea or southern Europe. This storm causes air to move. 2. Hot air comes from the Sahara Desert. The storm pulls very hot air from the Sahara Desert. This hot air is dry and carries dust and sand from the desert. 3. The hot wind blows across the sea. The hot air starts moving across the Mediterranean Sea and toward places like Italy, Spain, and France. This wind is called the Sirocco. What happens when the Sirocco blows? Very hot and dry. The Sirocco is very hot because it comes from the desert, and it is also dry, meaning there is very little water in the air. Full of dust and sand, the wind carries dust and sand from the Sahara Desert. This dust can fill the air, making it look cloudy or hazy. Sun is hard to see. Because of the dust, it might be hard to see the sun clearly. It looks like the sun is behind a thick layer of fog. How does the Sirocco affect people? Hotter weather. The temperature rises, making it feel hot, even if it's not summer. Dry air. Since the wind is dry, it can make the air feel uncomfortable, like your skin and lips might feel dry. Dusty air. The air is full of dust, which can make it hard to breathe, especially for people who have breathing problems like asthma. Where does the Sirocco wind blow? Italy. In places like southern Italy, the Sirocco wind brings hot, dusty air. Spain. In Spain, this wind is called Leveche. France. In southern France, the Sirocco can also blow, making the air feel warm and dusty. How long does the Sirocco last? Several days. The Sirocco can blow for several days in a row. During this time, the air remains hot, dry, and dusty. What changes as the Sirocco blows over the sea? Picks up moisture. As the Sirocco wind moves over the Mediterranean Sea, it picks up moisture, water vapor from the sea. Warm and humid. By the time the wind reaches places like France or Italy, it might feel warm and a bit humid, sticky, with more moisture in the air, because it has absorbed moisture from the sea. Other names for the Sirocco wind. Leveche. In Spain, people call the Sirocco Leveche. Leste in Madeira Island and Morocco, this wind is called Leste. Brickfield in Austria, there's a similar wind called the Brickfielder. It's also hot and dry. Example of what it feels like. Imagine you are outside in southern Italy on a normal day. Suddenly, a hot wind blows in from the desert. This wind feels like someone opened an oven near you. The air is dry, your skin feels like it's losing moisture, and there's dust everywhere. The sun becomes hard to see because of the dust in the air. This is what it feels like when the Sirocco wind arrives. What does a Sirocco wind do? 1. Temperature rises. The wind brings hot air from the Sahara, which makes the temperature go up, even if it's not summer. 2. Dust storms. The wind is full of dust and sand. It can look like a dust storm and the air gets thick with sand. 3. Difficult breathing. The dust in the air can make it hard to breathe for some people, especially if they have asthma or other breathing problems. 4. Hazy sky. The dust blocks the sun, so the sky looks hazy or cloudy, even though there aren't any clouds. Summary. The Sirocco is a hot, dry, and dusty wind that blows from the Sahara Desert toward the Mediterranean Sea and places like Italy and Spain. It happens when a storm depression forms and pulls the hot desert air toward Europe. This wind can make the air hot, dusty, and hard to breathe for several days. It's known by different names in other places, like Leveche in Spain and Brickfielder in Australia. That's the full explanation of the Sirocco winds. Let me know if you need more examples or more details. Sure. Let's go into more detail about each wind while keeping it very simple and easy to understand. 1. Khamsin wind, Egypt. What is it? The Khamsin is a very hot and dry wind that comes from the deserts in Egypt. When does it happen? It usually blows in spring when temperatures start to rise. Where does it come from? It originates in the hot deserts. Because it travels over the hot ground, it picks up a lot of sand. What does it feel like? When the Khamsin blows, it can feel like a sandstorm. You might feel the sand hitting your skin, and it can be hard to see because of the dust in the air. Example, imagine standing outside in Egypt in the spring and suddenly a hot wind blows. It feels like you're getting blasted by a hairdryer, but with sand in the air. Up to Simoom wind, deserts of Asia and Africa. What is it? The Simoom is a very intensely hot and dry wind found in the deserts of Asia and Africa. Where does it come from? It comes from warm tropical areas, and because it travels over hot ground, it gets very dusty. What does it feel like? The Simoom feels like an oven blowing hot air at you. It can make breathing feel difficult because of the heat and dust. Example, if you are in a desert and the Simoom starts blowing, it would be like standing too close to an oven while it's on. You would feel hot and uncomfortable with sand in your mouth. 3. Harmattan wind, West Africa. What is it? The Harmattan is a dry and dusty wind that blows from the Sahara Desert towards the west coast of Africa. When does it happen? This wind mostly blows during winter. What does it feel like? The Harmattan brings dry air, which can make the air feel cooler compared to the hot, humid air in places like Guinea. It can also reduce the heat and make the weather more pleasant. Example, imagine you're in a hot place and suddenly a cool dry blows. This is like getting a refreshing breeze on a hot day, making it easier to enjoy being outside. 4. Black roller wind, Great Plains, North America. What is it? Black roller is a very strong and dusty wind found in the Great Plains of North America. Where does it come from? This wind can come from different directions, usually from the southwest or northwest. What does it feel like? The black roller carries a lot of sand. When it blows, it can create a dust storm, making it hard to see and breathe. It can even cover buildings and roads with sand. Example, imagine you are standing outside on a calm day and suddenly a powerful wind comes up, blowing dust everywhere. You might have to cover your face to avoid getting sand in your mouth and eyes. 5. Shamal wind, Mesopotamia and Persian Gulf. What is it? The Shamal is a warm and dry wind that blows in Mesopotamia, which is modern-day Iraq, and the Persian Gulf region. Where does it come from? It usually comes from the northeast.
What does it feel like?
This wind can create dust storms, making it difficult to see. It feels very dry and can make the temperature feel hotter than it is. Example, if you were in Mesopotamia and the Shamal blew in, you might feel the air get very dry and scratchy in your throat, like when you breathe in a lot of dust. 6. Nor'wester wind. What is it? The nor'wester is a warm, dry and gusty wind that comes down from the high mountains in New Zealand. Where does it come from? This wind comes down the mountains, bringing warm air with it. What does it feel like? The nor'wester can feel like a sudden blast of warm air, similar to when you open an oven door. It can dry out the area quickly. Example, imagine you are on a hill in New Zealand and suddenly a warm wind comes rushing down. It feels like someone turned on a heater next to you. Summary of warm and dry winds. Khamsin, hot and dry, carrying sand in Egypt during spring. Sim, extremely hot and dry, suffocating in Asian and African deserts. Harmattan, dry and dusty in West Africa, cools down humid areas in winter. Black, strong and dusty in North America, can bury things in sand. Warm and dry in Mesopotamia, brings dust storms. Nor'wester, warm and dry in New Zealand, gusty winds from mountains. These winds affect the weather in the places they blow. They can bring dust, heat, and sometimes even changes in temperature. Each wind has a unique name depending on where it occurs, but they all share the common features of being warm, dry, and often dusty. If you have any more questions or want more examples, feel free to ask. Let's explain cold local winds step by step in the easiest way, just like teaching someone with no prior knowledge. What are cold local winds? Cold local winds are winds that blow in certain places and bring cold air with them. These winds can feel chilly or freezing, and sometimes they carry dust or are very dry. Now let's talk about one specific cold local wind called the Mistral. What is the Mistral wind? The Mistral is a cold wind that blows from the northwest. This means it comes from the direction between north and west. It blows into the Mediterranean Sea area, which is in southern Europe, especially France and Spain. Where does the Mistral come from? The Mistral comes from a high, cold place called the Auvergne Plateau. A plateau is a flat land on top of a mountain. Then it moves down into the Rhone Valley, which is in the southern part of France. When does the Mistral blow? The Mistral mostly blows in the winter months when the weather is already cold. What does the Mistral feel like? The Mistral is very cold and dry. It makes the air feel freezing, and it can even make you shiver if you are outside. Where can you feel the Mistral? You can feel the Mistral wind along the Mediterranean coast from places like the Rhone Valley in France, from the mouth of the Ebro River in Spain to the Gulf of Genoa in Italy. The Mistral can sometimes feel stormy, meaning it blows hard and fast. Why does the Mistral happen? It happens when cold air from the mountains rushes down into the warmer coastal areas. This creates a strong wind that blows fast and makes the weather feel much colder. Example: imagine you are outside on a cold winter day and suddenly a strong wind blows from the mountains. It feels even colder because the wind is dry and fast. This is what it feels like when the Mistral blows. Fun fact: the Mistral wind can be so strong that it can push ships in the sea and even shake trees on the ground. Does this make sense so far? Feel free to ask if you need more help. Let's break this down so it's really easy to understand, as if teaching a child with no knowledge. What are cold local winds? Cold local are winds that blow in specific places and bring very cold air. These winds can be strong, cold, and sometimes even carry snow or dry air. We'll talk about two important types of cold winds: Bora and blizzard. What is the Bora wind? Bora is a cold wind that blows from the northeast. It happens in a place called the Adriatic Sea. This sea is located between Italy and countries like Croatia and Slovenia. Where does the Bora come from? Bora starts from high mountains near the Adriatic Sea. This wind rushes down the mountains and hits the coastal area, the land near the sea. How strong is the Bora? The Bora is very strong and fast. It can blow with a speed of up to 196 kilometers per hour. That's really fast, almost like a car on a highway. Sometimes it blows so hard that it feels like a hurricane. When does Bora happen? Bora usually happens in the winter when the air in the mountains gets very cold. In the winter, a special weather system called an anticyclone forms. This makes the air colder, and then the Bora wind blows down from the mountains. What does Bora feel like? Even though the air warms a little when it comes down the mountain, it's still colder than the air along the coast. People living by the sea feel the cold gusts of the Bora wind, and it can make the temperature drop a lot. Where else does Bora happen? Besides the Adriatic Sea, Bora-type winds also happen on the northern Black Sea coast in Japan, in northern Scandinavia, in Europe, in places like Novaya Zemlya, an island in Russia. Example of Bora. Imagine standing on the beach and suddenly a strong freezing wind blows from the mountains toward the sea. It's so cold that even if you're wrapped in a coat, you can still feel the cold air chilling your face. That's what the Bora wind is like. What is a blizzard? A blizzard is a very cold wind that also carries dry snow. The snow doesn't just fall from the sky. It's picked up from the ground and blown by the strong wind. How does a blizzard happen? A blizzard happens when cold winds blow over areas that already have a lot of snow on the ground. These winds pick up the snow and throw it around, making it hard to see and making the temperature feel even colder. Where do blizzards happen? Blizzards are common in high latitudes, like near the Arctic or in Antarctica. They are also famous in the United States, especially in the Great Plains near the Rocky Mountains. What does a blizzard feel like? Blizzards are very dangerous because they bring very cold air, lots of snow and strong winds. The wind speed can reach up to 160 kilometers per hour, almost like a car on the highway. The temperature during a blizzard can be as cold as by 7 degrees Celsius. Example of a blizzard. Imagine a strong, cold wind is blowing so hard that it picks up the snow from the ground and throws it everywhere. You can't see much because the snow is flying all around you. It feels so cold that it's like standing in a freezer. That's what a blizzard is like. Summary. Bora and blizzard are both cold winds, but happen in different ways. Bora comes from the mountains, blows very fast, and is common near the Adriatic Sea. Blizzards blow snow around and are very cold, happening mostly in cold places like Antarctica or the northern parts of the world. Simple tip, if you ever hear about these winds, just remember, Bora equals cold wind from mountains. Blizzard equals cold wind with snow. Let me know if you want more examples or need any further explanation. Let's go even deeper into these cold local winds, and I'll break it down as simply as possible. What are cold local winds? Winds are just air that moves from one place to another. Sometimes winds carry cold air, which makes the temperature drop and can even cause bad weather like snow, fog, or dust storms. These cold winds don't happen everywhere. They only happen in specific regions, and people have given them special names depending on where they blow. Now, let's talk about each cold wind in detail. 1. Buran, Eastern Russia and Central Siberia. Where it happens? In Russia, especially in the areas called Siberia and the eastern part of Russia. What it does? Buran brings very cold and sometimes snowy winds. Why it happens? In winter, the air over Siberia becomes extremely cold. This cold air, blown by the wind, moves very fast and makes it feel even colder. How strong? Sometimes Buran can be so strong that it causes snowstorms where snow blows around everywhere. Example, imagine you're standing outside in Siberia during winter. Suddenly, the wind gets very strong and snow starts flying through the air. The cold wind that's freezing you is called Buran. 2. Purga, Russian tundra. Where it happens? In the Russian tundra, which is a large, flat and frozen land in the northern part of Russia. What it does? Purga brings snow and cold air. Why it happens? Just like Buran, Purga happens when cold air starts moving quickly over the snowy land. How strong? When Purga blows, it feels like the coldest place on Earth. The wind is fast and there's usually a lot of snow being blown around. If you're in a very cold place like the tundra in Russia and the wind picks up snow and throws it around, that wind is called Purga. 3. Bis, France. Where it happens? In France, mostly in the winter. What it does? Bis is a cold wind that comes from the north. Why it happens? In winter, the air in the north becomes very cold, and when the wind moves, it carries this cold air to France. It makes the winter feel even colder. How strong? Bis can make the weather feel very chilly. Example, if you're in France, especially in the mountains or the countryside, and you feel a sharp cold breeze in the winter, that's bis. Hammer 4, Levant, southern Spain. Where it happens? In southern Spain, especially near the Strait of Gibraltar. This is a narrow water passage between Spain and Africa. What it does? Levanta is a strong wind that brings fog and wet air. Why it happens? This wind comes from the east and moves across the sea, picking up moisture and creating fog when it hits the land. How strong? Levanta can make it very foggy and damp, making it hard to see things around you. Example, imagine standing near the sea in Spain and suddenly a wind brings a lot of fog that covers everything. That's Levanta. Have 5, Norther, Texas and Gulf of Mexico. where it happens in Texas and it blows southward to the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean. What it does, norther is a cold wind that brings a sharp drop in temperature during the winter. Why it happens, in the southern part of the United States, there is a lot of cold air in the winter. The wind moves this cold air south, making the areas near the Gulf of Mexico and Texas feel much colder. How strong? When norther blows, it can make it feel very cold, even in places that are usually warm. Example, if you're in Texas or near the Gulf of Mexico and feel a sudden cold breeze during winter, that's the norther. 6. Pampero, South America, where it happens. In Argentina and other parts of South America, especially in the Pampas, large flat plains. What it does, Pampero is a cold wind that brings cooler temperatures and sometimes dust storms or rain. Why it happens? In the winter, cold air moves down from the mountains and spreads across the flat lands of Argentina. How strong? Sometimes Pampero can be very strong and it may bring dust or rain with it. Example, imagine standing on a flat field in Argentina. A strong cold wind suddenly blows and it carries dust or even brings rain. That's the Pampero. 7. Papagayo, Costa Rica, where it happens. On the northwest coast of Costa Rica, especially in the Gulf of Papagayo. What it does, Papagayo is a strong wind that brings cold air. Why it happens? During the colder part of the year, cold air from the northeast blows down to the coast of Costa Rica. How strong? Papagayo can be very strong and makes the sea rough with big waves. Example, if you're near the coast in Costa Rica and feel a strong wind blowing, that's the Papagayo. Additional notes. Why are these winds important? These cold local winds can make the temperature drop very quickly and bring bad weather like fog, snow, or even dust storms. People living in areas where these winds blow need to be prepared because some winds can be very strong and dangerous. Easy to remember summary. Buran and Purg, cold winds from Russia, sometimes with snow. Bice, cold wind in France, making winters chillier. Levanta, foggy wind in Spain, making the air wet and hard to see through. Norther, cold wind from Texas to Mexico, making the south feel like winter. Pampero in Argentina, often bringing dust or rain. Papagayo, cold wind in Costa Rica, making the sea wild with strong winds. Let me know if you'd like more explanations or examples. Let's break this down even more simply so you can understand every part easily. Local winds, what are they? Winds are just air moving from one place to another. Sometimes these winds are hot and sometimes they are cold. Local winds are winds that happen only in specific places because of the special conditions there, like mountains, valleys, oceans, or deserts. Some winds come with storms or cyclones, while others might come from calm weather systems called anticyclones, which bring clear skies. Types of local winds. Here are a few examples of local winds from different parts of the world. Some are hot and some are cold. 1. Cat's paw. What it is, a gentle breeze that happens over the ocean. What it does, it creates small, rippled waves on the water. Example, imagine sitting on the beach and noticing small, tiny waves on the surface of the water. The soft wind that causes those ripples is called a cat's paw. 2. Cordonazo. What it is, a cold wind that blows in South America, especially in Argentina. What it does, it can make the temperature feel cooler very quickly. Example, in Argentina, if you're outside and suddenly feel a strong cold breeze, that could be a cordonazo. 3. Where it happens, in the Mediterranean Sea, especially around Malta. What it does, it's a cold wind that brings stormy weather. Example, if you're near the Mediterranean and feel a cold wind that causes the waves to get big, that's the gregale. 4. Chubasco. What it is, a wind that comes with rain and sometimes even a storm. Where it happens, mostly in Central America and Mexico. What it does, Chubasco brings heavy rain and sometimes thunderstorms. Example, if you're in Mexico and you see the sky turn dark and a wind with heavy rain starts, that's a chubasco. Some winds are hot and some are cold. Some winds bring warm air while others carry cold air. For example, Bora from Europe and Mistral from France are cold winds. These are often strong and make it feel much colder. On the other hand, Sirocco is a hot wind that blows from the Sahara Desert to Europe, bringing hot and dry weather. Special winds, called katabatic winds. Katabatic winds, also called drainage winds, happen when cold air from the top of a mountain or hill moves down into valleys or lowlands. These winds are also called gravity winds because gravity pulls the cold air downhill. Examples of katabatic winds. Mistral, France, a cold wind that rushes down the mountains to the Mediterranean coast. Bora, Europe, a cold wind that comes down from the mountains near the Adriatic Sea. Willy War, Antarctica, a strong, cold wind that blows down from glaciers. How these winds affect the environment. Cold and hot winds can have a big impact on animals, plants, and the environment. For example, cold winds can make it hard for animals to stay warm and for plants to survive. Hot winds can dry out the soil and harm crops. Some winds can carry dust or pollution from one area to another, affecting the air quality. But not all local winds are harmful. For example, sea breeze and land breeze, which happen near the ocean, are actually very helpful and refreshing for people living in coastal areas. Let's look at sea breeze and land breeze. Sea breeze, what it is, a cool wind that blows from the sea to the land during the daytime. Why it happens? The land heats up faster than the sea during the day, so the air over the land gets hot and rises, and cool air from the sea comes in to take its place. How it feels? It feels cool and refreshing on a hot day by the coast. If you're at the beach during the day and feel a cool breeze coming from the water, that's a sea breeze. 2. Land breeze. What it is, a cool wind that blows from the land to the sea at night. Why it happens? At night, the land cools down faster than the sea, so the cool air from the land blows out toward the warmer sea. Example, if you're near the coast at night and feel a breeze coming from the land toward the ocean, that's a land breeze. Summary. Local winds are winds that happen in specific places under special conditions. Some are cold and some are hot. Katabatic winds are cold winds that move downhill from high places, like mountains, into valleys. Some winds, like sea breeze and land breeze, are helpful and refreshing, while others can bring extreme weather. These winds affect the weather and the environment, sometimes making it hard for animals, plants, and even people to live comfortably. Let me know if you need more examples or explanations.